tava somyam janardana idanim asmi samvritaha sachita prakritim gataha. When Arjuna thus saw Krishna in his original form, he said, "Seeing this human-like form, so very beautiful, my mind is now pacified, and I am restored to my original nature." Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Sudurdarsham idam rupam dristavan asiyan mama deva apyasya rupasya nityam darshana kankshinaha. The blessed Lord said, "My dear Arjuna, the form which you are now seeing is very difficult to behold. Even the demigods are ever seeking the opportunity to see this form, which is so dear." Naham veder na tapasa na danena na cheyaya shakya evam vido drashtum drishtavan asimam yata. The form which you are seeing with your transcendental eyes cannot be understood simply by studying the Vedas, nor by undergoing serious penances, nor by charity, nor by worship. It is not by these means that one can see me as I am. Bhaktya tvananyaya shakya aham evam vidurjuna gyatum drashtum cha tatvena praveshtum cha parantapa. My dear Arjuna, only by undivided devotional service can I be understood as I am, standing before you, and can thus be seen directly. Only in this way can you enter into the mysteries of my understanding. Mat karma krinmat paramo madbhakta sangavarjitaha nirvera sarvabhuteshu yasa mam iti pandava. My dear Arjuna, one who is engaged in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of previous activities and from mental speculation, who is friendly to every living entity, certainly comes to me. Chapter 12, Devotional Service. Arjuna uvacha evam satata yuktaye bhaktastvam paryupasate ye chapyaksharam avyaktam tesham ke yoga vitamaha. Arjuna inquired, "Which is considered to be more perfect, those who are properly engaged in your devotional service, or those who worship the impersonal Brahman, the unmanifested?" 55. I think we go to text 3. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Maya Veshya Mano Ye Mam Nitya Yukta Upasate Shradaya Parayo Petas Te Me Yuktatama Mataha. The blessed Lord said, "He whose mind is fixed on my personal form, always engaged in worshipping me with great and transcendental faith, is considered by me to be most perfect." Ye tvaksharam anirdesham avyaktam paryupasate sarvatra gam achintyam cha kutastam achalam dhruvam saniyam yendriya gramam sarvatra samabhudayaha te prapnuvanti mam eva sarvabhuta hite rataha. But those who fully worship the unmanifested, that which lies beyond the perception of the senses, the all-pervading, inconceivable, fixed and immovable, the impersonal conception of the absolute truth, by controlling the various senses and being equally disposed to everyone, such persons, engaged in the welfare of all, at last achieve me. Okay, we can go back to text 47. Chapter 11, text 47. Yeah. The blessed Lord said, "My dear Arjuna, happily do I show you this universal form within the material world by my internal potency. No one before you has ever seen this unlimited and glaringly effulgent form." Purport. Arjuna wanted to see the universal form of the Supreme Lord, so out of his mercy upon his devotee Arjuna, Lord Krishna showed his universal form full of effulgence and opulence. This form was glaring like the sun, and its many faces were rapidly changing. Krishna showed this form just to satisfy the desire of his friend Arjuna. This form was manifested by Krishna through his internal potency, which is inconceivable by human speculation. No one had seen this universal form of the Lord before Arjuna, but because the form was shown to Arjuna, other devotees in the heavenly planets and in other planets in outer space could also see it. They did not see it before, but because of Arjuna, they were able to see it. In other words, all the disciplic devotees of the Lord could see the universal form which was shown to Arjuna by the mercy of Krishna. Someone commented that this form was shown to Duryodhana also when Krishna went to Duryodhana to negotiate for peace. Unfortunately, Duryodhana did not accept the peace offer, but at that time Krishna manifested some of his universal forms. But those forms are different from this one shown to Arjuna. It is clearly said that no one has ever seen this form before. If Maharaj has any comments, we'd be very eager to hear them. Okay. So we're hearing that from the person who's showing his universal form from God, that no one besides Arjuna has seen it. And the same person who this form belongs to, he later said, that this form can't be seen by studying the Vedas, by performing austerities, by doing charities or other activities. He's choosing to show this form to Arjuna because Arjuna is his devotee. So no one's seen it before Arjuna, and Krishna only shows it to someone who he wants to show it to. So when many people might say, I've seen God, or you can see God through drugs, or you can see God through this or that, all sorts of crazy ideas. But we can see here that actually, to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one has to be a devotee. Krishna explains that it's the only way to come to him is through devotional service. Just like if one wants to see the president or the CEO of some big business, if they can do some service to that person and please him in some way, then he'll be happy to show himself to that person, to meet with that person. If someone thinks, okay, I want to go see the president, so I'll just do whatever I think is the right, just whatever I feel like, and somehow I'll get to see him, it won't work. They can run into the White House yard and try to hop the fence and do whatever their idea is, but they won't be able to see him. But if they can please him or please someone who is dear to him, then it's very easy to see him. So these ideas that you can see God just by some sort of mental gymnastics or some other material facility, we can see it's not actually possible. But because Krishna is pleased with Arjuna and Arjuna is his friend, he agrees to show this universal form, which ultimately we see later in the purports isn't the topmost thing. The topmost thing that all great devotees are trying to, with great difficulty, to see is that personal form of Krishna with two arms. So Srila Prabhupada explains how Krishna is very great, and he's also inconceivable. He can be bigger than the biggest, with unlimited universes coming from him. He can be smaller than the smallest. He's in every atom of the whole creation, but at the same time, he has his medium-sized form. So Krishna can do things that no living entity can do. And we'll hear in the purports, Srila Prabhupada mentions how some persons, they'll claim that I am God. So you just, different types of gurus and spiritual teachers, they'll claim that I am the Supreme. But there's so many ways we can see that someone who's claiming to be the Supreme can't be. For instance, if they were, they could show this universal form. Or they could even just control very basic things, like many of them are very old. There was one person who was interested in one of these gurus who says he's God and all of these things. And he's meeting with Srila Prabhupada. And when he would meet with Prabhupada, he would ask him questions like about God. And Prabhupada would give him different things to go and say to this bogus guru. He said, one thing you can ask him is, if he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is ever youthful, then why is he getting old? And he would go to this guru and ask him, why are you getting old? And he would say, he wouldn't have an explanation, actually. And like this, they would go back and forth, and it's just very basic questions, and he wouldn't be able to answer. So this chapter is a nice clarification for seeing who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One is that he's the owner of everything. He's able to show everything within his own form. We'll hear more in the purports, but pretty much nobody can claim to be God without being able to show somehow or other that they are God. For instance, Krishna can lift an entire mountain, but these so-called gurus and spiritual leaders can't even, some of them are very old, they can't even jump up and down. So, okay, we can hear some more from the purport. O best of the Kuru warriors, no one before you has ever seen this universal form of mine. For neither by studying the Vedas, nor by performing sacrifices, nor by charities or similar activities can this form be seen. Only you have seen this. Purport. The divine vision in this connection should be clearly understood. Who can have divine vision? Divine means godly. Unless one attains the status of divinity as a demigod, he cannot have divine vision. And what is a demigod? It is stated in the Vedic scriptures that those who are devotees of Lord Vishnu are demigods. Those who are atheistic, who do not believe in Vishnu, or who only recognize the impersonal part of Krishna as the supreme, cannot have the divine vision. It is not possible to decry Krishna and at the same time have the divine vision. One cannot have the divine vision without becoming divine. In other words, those who have divine vision can also see like Arjuna. The Bhagavad Gita gives the description of the universal form, and this description was unknown to everyone before Arjuna. Now one can have some idea of the Vishvarupa after this incident. Those who are actually divine can see the universal form of the Lord, but one cannot be divine without being a pure devotee of Krishna. The devotees, however, who are actually in the divine nature and who have divine vision, are not very much interested to see the universal form of the Lord. As described in the previous verse, Arjuna desired to see the four-handed form of Lord Krishna as Vishnu, and he was actually afraid of the universal form. In this verse, there are some significant words, just like Veda Yagyadya Yanai, which refers to studying Vedic literature and the subject matter of sacrificial regulations. Veda refers to all kinds of Vedic literature, namely the four Vedas, Rig, Yajus, Sama, and Atharva, and the 18 Puranas and Upanishads, and the Vedanta Sutra. One can study these at home or anywhere else. Similarly, there are sutras, Kalpa Sutras and Mimamsa Sutras, for studying the method of sacrifice. Dhanai refers to charity which is offered to a suitable party, such as those who are engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, the Brahmanas and the Vaishnavas. Similarly, pious activities refer to the Agnihotra, etc., the prescribed duties of the different castes. Pious activities and the voluntary acceptance of some bodily pains are called tapasya. So one can perform all these, can accept bodily penances, give charity, study the Vedas, etc., but unless he is a devotee like Arjuna, it is not possible to see that universal form. Those who are impersonalists are also imagining that they are seeing the universal form of the Lord. But from Bhagavad Gita, we understand that the impersonalists are not devotees. Therefore, they are unable to see the universal form of the Lord. There are many persons who create incarnations. They falsely claim an ordinary human to be an incarnation. But this is all foolishness. We should follow the principles of Bhagavad Gita. Otherwise, there is no possibility of attaining perfect spiritual knowledge. Although Bhagavad Gita is considered the preliminary study of the science of God, still it is so perfect that one can distinguish what is what. The followers of a pseudo-incarnation may say that they have seen the transcendental incarnation of God, the universal form, but that is not acceptable because it is clearly stated here that unless one becomes a devotee of Krishna, one cannot see the universal form of God. So one first of all has to become a pure devotee of Krishna. Then he can claim that he can show the universal form of what he has seen. A devotee of Krishna cannot accept false incarnations or followers of false incarnations. So I was just hearing a conversation that Srila Prabhupada was having with his devotees in Mexico. And he was talking about how Krishna consciousness is very simple. And if we present it simply, then people can easily accept it. So he was saying, religion is the orders of God. And if you follow the orders of God, then you're religious. And if you don't follow the orders of God, then you're a demon. So he made it very simple. That if one... That's pretty much it. There's a supreme person. Everything is coming from him. He cares for all the living entities. And he shows them how they can get out of all the sufferings of life. So if we accept what he's saying and actually take to it, then all problems are solved. And if we don't, then we stay here in this material world. And the reason the word demon is used is because it means I'm just following my own desires. There's the desires of the person who really cares for us, that's Krishna. And then there's our own desires. So everyone's coming from Krishna. He's like the mother and father of every living entity. So he really knows what's best for us, just like when a kid runs away from the home. If he has rich parents, if he just goes back to the home, everything is set for him. But if he runs away, he's got to struggle and all of these things. So like that, Krishna, he's the richest, and he's showing all the living entities who are his children how to just come back to him. Because the soul isn't actually meant to go through birth, death, disease, and old age. These things are artificial for the soul. The body has to go through them, but like we hear in the second chapter, Krishna explains to Arjuna what the difference is between the body and the soul. He tells him, "Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. As the embodied soul continually passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. The self-realized soul is not bewildered by such a change." And there's one more. What is it? I can't hear you. This is chapter 2, text 17. "Know that which pervades the entire body is indestructible. No one is able to destroy the imperishable soul." So that's us, that's the person. "Only the material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal living entity is subject to destruction." And also this one. This is text 19, chapter 2. "He who thinks that the living entity is the slayer or that he is slain does not understand. One who is in knowledge knows that the self slays not nor is slain." So the soul is eternal, and the soul has an eternal relationship with the supreme eternal Krishna. So Krishna consciousness, it's very simple. It just means to give up all of these unnecessary activities. Because of misidentifying with the body and thinking that we're temporary matter, we engage in so many activities that don't have anything to do with us. So there was another way that Srila Prabhupada put it in that conversation. He was saying, there is God, you are his servant, so serve God, that's all. So if the soul is a part and parcel of Krishna, so just like the hand, if it tries to enjoy on its own, there can be a great meal in front of it. And if it just tries to enjoy it, it eventually shrivels up. But if it takes that same meal and delivers it to the stomach, then the hand becomes satisfied, all the limbs are satisfied, the whole body is satisfied. So like that, since the living entity is a part and parcel of Krishna, if we just try to satisfy him, then we're satisfied. It's our natural position. So that's who we are, is we're naturally a servant of God. But if we want to try to enjoy on our own, like the hand, then it just doesn't work. There's no benefit. So in this conversation, Srila Prabhupada, he was clearing up a lot of doubts in this topic about these bogus incarnations. Some of the devotees were asking him, they would name different ones. I found it really helpful to hear because we meet a lot of people who like to follow some of these different personalities, and the devotees just had a very straightforward discussion. So, for instance, they mentioned one person. He was called Guru Maharaj Ji. I don't know if anyone knows this as a Guru Maharaj Ji, because I feel like anybody could use that name. It's kind of, Maharaj means great king, so anybody could use that. But so they mentioned this Guru Maharaj Ji, and Prabhupada just immediately started laughing, and he said, well, he's bogus because he's claiming that he's God. So how can one claim that he's Bhagavan? And he was giving some examples. For instance, if someone's claiming that he can be God, like there was this example with the devotee who would go to this teacher back and forth, and Prabhupada would give him things to say to him. One thing he went to say to him was, if you're God, that means you know what's happening in the hearts of all living entities, so just tell me what I'm thinking. And this so-called incarnation said, that I can't do. There's another one where this person, he stood up in this lecture that Radhanath Swami was giving, and he said, I am the Supreme. And Radhanath Swami said, please accept my humble obeisances. And he said, I accept. And they got into this whole discussion, and in the middle of the discussion, this so-called Supreme Personality of Godhead was saying that he had to go use the restroom. So Radhanath Swami told one of the devotees there to go in the restroom and lock it from the inside. So they continue their discussion over to the bathroom, and he's knocking on the door saying, let me in, like I really need to go. And the devotee's not opening. And as he's getting more and more distressed, at one point saying, you really need to, you need to let me in, we can continue the discussion. And Radhanath Swami was saying, if you're God, the Supreme Controller, then control your bowels. And he said, no, it's fine. I'll be like, I'm still God. And so he kept trying. And I think they made some sort of proposition, like, admit you're not God, and then we'll let you in there, something like that. And he kept saying, no, I'm God. But somehow or other, he went in. I think the conclusion is he went in the restroom. When he came back out, they asked him, so are you still the Supreme Controller? And he said, yeah, that was just one of my pastimes. So we can see these people are a little thick-headed. It's hard to get through to them. But it's very straightforward. The living entities can never be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to go through all of these different things. Sure, we can say, okay, it's my pastime. This whole world's for my enjoyment. And when I suffer, it's just because I wanted the suffering. But if that was true, then when we get fried out with suffering and really hope that it will stop, then we would just be able to end it immediately. But that doesn't happen. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he's in the hearts of all living entities, and he's showing them how they can come back to him. And as long as they want to remain in their envious position and think, okay, I am God, I'm the enjoyer, then they just stay here and have to go through birth, death, old age, disease, and all the miseries of the material world. Srila Prabhupada often describes how he'll say the material world, everyone is either suffering or enjoying the results of their activities. And then he'll say, not enjoying, always suffering. He often makes that clarification. Because the enjoyment of the material world, it's not enjoyment. It's the mind is thinking, if I achieve this thing, then I'll be happy. And then someone, for instance, okay, if I buy a car, then I'll be happy. So then someone goes and they achieve that, they buy the car, and the mind gets some flickering satisfaction for a few seconds. It says, okay, I achieved it. And they might think, wow, this is happiness. But it's not, because in a few minutes later, they're in anxiety. They're thinking, okay, now this car is already decreased in value. How am I going to maintain it? What if somebody scratches it? Maybe I should have got the better car. My neighbor just got the better. So like that, what they were thinking is happiness. It's really illusory because it's gone in a few seconds. But real happiness is something that actually satisfies and maintains and gets better and better. And we see that's what Krishna consciousness is. Otherwise, how would so many people who are engaging in so many materialistic activities, sinful activities beforehand, come to Krishna consciousness, and then for years they never do those things and they're happy? They look, Prabhupada always gives the example in the newspaper, it's describing the devotees as bright-faced, he would say. They have a bright face, they're happy, they're satisfied. Like we met this guy yesterday in Walmart. He was another Christian person who was trying to convince us that we must kill animals and eat them. We meet a lot of people here that really want to preach to us this very religious philosophy that you must kill animals and eat them. I don't know what it has to do with religion or God, but this is their philosophy. So he was talking to us, and he was saying, if I don't buy slaughtered animals and eat them, how will I survive? And I showed him, there's this devotee who's staying here who's really smart. His name is Ajit, which means unconquerable. And he really is, he's a genius. So Ajit was there, and I said, look at him, he hasn't eaten meat his entire life, and he looks healthy. And the guy was so surprised. He couldn't believe it. So like this, these sinful activities, they're unnecessary activities. It's called anartha, an unwanted thing. So these principles are there, and Srila Prabhupada always explains, and it's not just that he's explaining, but Krishna is explaining. If we read the Bhagavad Gita, if we read Srimad Bhagavatam, the Supreme Personality of Godhead shows how we can get out of this material entanglement and go back to our eternal blissful life. And it's very simple. If one just follows these 4 regulative principles and chants 16 rounds a day, they can become purified and go back home, back to the spiritual world. So, and what are those regulative principles? It's not something that's necessary to the soul. No illicit sex. The soul doesn't need that. That's something related to the body. And then no intoxication. No one is dying for want of either of these things. No one says, okay, I haven't had sex in this much amount of time, soon the body will fall apart and I'll die. No one says, I haven't smoked a cigarette in a year, so wish me luck. I'm not going to, soon the heart's going to stop. And they're unnecessary things. They're not needed. And then no gambling. That's just anxiety from the start to the finish. So we see it's not needed. And then no meat eating. And that example was given. Ajit, he's a strong, healthy man. So it's very simple. If one can follow these principles, then they're saved from all miserable conditions of life. That's what it is. That's why it's explained in the Bhagavad Gita as the regulative principles of freedom. Because they're freeing one from being bound to this material world. If one does some activity, then they're responsible for it. So if one does because we're under the control of the laws of nature. So no matter what you do, the laws of nature will act. If there's a fire, if I put my hand in the fire or a little baby puts his hand in the fire, still it'll burn either one of us. He doesn't say, oh, that one's a baby, I'll excuse him, give him some leeway. No, the laws of nature are so strict, they'll act. So if we do some activity that's against the laws of nature, then we have to suffer the result for it. And if somebody does something that's some pious activity, then they have to enjoy the result for it. So either one, the suffering or the so-called enjoying, it's keeping one in this material world. It's karma. They have to get the result for that activity. But if one engages in service to God, then they become free from all karma. Krishna says it many times, but then he also explains how that works. Because he's free from karma himself. He's not bound by this world because he made it. He's above all of it. So if you serve him and always think of him, just like anything we associate with, we become like that thing. So if one serves Krishna, they're always thinking of him, they gain qualities like Krishna. He explains that if one understands this nature that he has, that he's, I'm probably not going to find the text, but if one understands this nature that he has, that he's not bound by karma, then they also become not bound by karma. So if one can properly understand him and serve him, they also gain qualities like him, mainly that they become transcendental. That's the natural position of the soul. It's above everything in this material world. It's not bound by time. It doesn't get old. It's made of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And we see the material world's the exact opposite. Everything here is temporary. As far as bliss, that's not there. There's some flickering stimulation of the senses, and then so much suffering. And then knowledge, that's not there in the material world either. It's a position of ignorance. We have different senses for acquiring knowledge, and all of them are imperfect. Our eyes are imperfect. I can't tell you what's beyond that wall, or if the light turns off, I can't describe anything in the room. My sense of taste is imperfect, sense of hearing is imperfect. All of our senses are imperfect. So if we can accept that, then we'll realize that, okay, I need to find knowledge from a perfect source. All my senses for acquiring knowledge are imperfect, so all my knowledge is imperfect. Therefore, I need to get knowledge from the perfect person. So therefore, the Vedas say, tad vigyanartam sagurum eva bigachet. One must approach a guru if they want to perfect their life. And what's a guru? The guru is one who he fully understands the Vedas and he has firm faith in the absolute truth. He knows the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's firmly fixed up at the lotus feet of the Lord. So that person who is the topmost devotee of the Lord, he can give perfect knowledge, because him and the perfect person are like this. So he just has, he's the friend of Krishna. So he just speaks what Krishna is speaking, and like this, the tiny living entity, jiva soul, can become enlightened and go back to Krishna. They can remember who he is, what's their position as his servant, and how to serve him. Are there any comments or questions so far? Okay.
I like to express the difference between knowledge and wisdom, and what I'm getting from what you're saying is that there's knowledge of the material world or the wisdom of Krishna. Do you think that that would be like an accurate representation?
There's knowledge of the material world or the wisdom of... Well, the material world's coming from Krishna. So even that knowledge, that's his wisdom. He explains everything, how this material world's working, how it's manifested. The whole Bhagavatam explains how everything in the material world comes into creation, how it's working. So all knowledge is ultimately coming from the source of all knowledge, Krishna. There's a verse where he explains that I'm the compiler of the Vedas. The Vedas means knowledge. It doesn't just mean like this scripture, that scripture, but it means knowledge. So he says, I'm the compiler of the Vedas, I'm the knower of the Vedas, and I'm the goal of the Veda, or the object of the Vedas. So all knowledge is coming from him, and not only is it coming from him, but he's also the goal of it. So one can know everything just by knowing who everything is coming from. If one knows Krishna, that person knows everything. So that's why it's explained that one should find that person who actually is in full knowledge, and then surrender to them, render service to them, and inquire from them submissively, and they'll impart the truth to you because they've seen it. So that's the necessity of finding a spiritual master. And Arjuna, he gives the perfect example in the Bhagavad Gita. The whole Gita more or less wouldn't have happened if he didn't say this. It's in chapter 2, near the beginning. Let's see. Okay. No. Where does Krishna surrender to where does Arjuna surrender to Krishna? Yeah, Prapanya Dosha 2:7. Yeah, okay. This is chapter 2, text 7. Karpanya dosho pahata swabhavaha prichami tvam dharma samudachetaha yaktreyasyan nishchitam bruhi tanme shishyasteham sadimam tvam prapanam. Now I am confused about my duty, and have lost all composure because of weakness. In this condition I am asking you to tell me clearly what is best for me. Now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. So, because Arjuna came to this conclusion, then he was finally able to solve all of his problems. If you look at all of the verses before that, he has a lot of problems. He's in the middle of a huge war, and he's got family members on both sides. And he presents to Krishna all these different solutions, but he hasn't surrendered to him yet, so they don't come to any conclusion. He says, Krishna, maybe it's like this, maybe it's like that, maybe this is a good idea, maybe we should do that instead. And there's no conclusion. But finally, he tells Krishna, now I am your disciple and a soul surrendered unto you. Please instruct me. And then Krishna instructs. First thing is that Krishna accepts him as a disciple, so therefore he chastises him. He tells him that you're speaking learned words, but you're lamenting for something which a learned person doesn't lament for. You're grieving over this body, and you're not the body. So essentially he tells him you're lamenting for something a learned person doesn't lament for. That means you're a fool. So he chastises him from the very beginning. He accepts him as a disciple, and then he explains to him everything about himself, this material world, how he can solve all of the problems of life. And then Krishna, he doesn't force the living entities because he's a person and he creates unlimited other persons who he's maintaining for his enjoyment. He doesn't make them robots. He has a relationship. We all have a relationship with Krishna in many different varieties. So therefore he keeps the free will of all the living entities intact. And so after the whole Gita is spoken, he tells Arjuna, now you've heard from me, and you do what you like to do. And he also asks him, there's something like, are your doubts now cleared? Or are you now like in a purified type of state? Let's see. Well, there's this one. What is it? You know where it is? Well, there's this one, that I have explained to you the most confidential of all knowledge. Deliberate on this fully, and then do what you wish to do. So he explains it to Arjuna, and he tells him, do what you wish to do. And then Arjuna tells him that, okay, now I'm actually ready to fight. I want to do what you want, Krishna. And Krishna wanted him to fight. So that's the purpose of the whole Gita. If one can find a spiritual master and surrender unto them and hear from them submissively, then they can realize that, okay, yeah, let me actually do what Krishna wants me to do. And even just by hearing this Bhagavad Gita, it's non-different than being in the position that Arjuna was in. We might think, I'm not on the chariot, Krishna's not in front of me, how can I actually do what he wants? But it's explained by Srila Prabhupada that just hearing these words of Krishna, since it's transcendental, it's non-different than actually being there with him. So one can hear this and come to the same conclusion as Arjuna, that, okay, Krishna, you are my real well-wisher, you fully love me, so it's just normal, or like, it's just a little bit, it's just gentlemanly that I would at least try to fully love you as well and just do what you want. So that's why he speaks the whole Gita, and Arjuna comes to that conclusion in the end. So one can know everything by knowing Krishna and finding his pure representative, hearing from them. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Prabhu. Could you also elaborate on 13:8 through 12? Describes what knowledge is.
Chapter 13, text 8 through 12. Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, and self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of birth and death, old age and disease, non-attachment to children, wife, home, and the rest, and even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, resorting to solitary places, detachment from the general mass of people, Accepting the importance of self-realization and philosophical search for the absolute truth, all these I declare to be knowledge, and what is contrary to these is ignorance. So yeah, here Krishna is giving the definition of knowledge, and so that's the best place to understand what is knowledge, because it's coming from him. But with this verse, it's also really important. There's a long purport, and if any of this verse is like standing out to us, then we should read through the whole purport, because Srila Prabhupada very helpfully gives the definition of each of these words. It's just so that we don't speculate and think it's something else. But Krishna is explaining these things are knowledge, and we see the knowledge that's mostly propagated in the world today. It's not knowledge at all, because it's lacking in all of these things. If you think of any kind of educational institution, real education means someone actually grows in moral character. It's their building character, that's education. But if we look at any type of educational institution, there's no sense of character at all. That's a whole discussion, but I guess just for one example is if you look at the colleges, people, they go to some classes and they learn nothing about the soul, nothing that can actually really help them. They're not learning, okay, who am I? What is life? What is death? What's my purpose? How can I make the most with my life? But you learn a few little skills. So it's to train people up in a craft, so they can work for somebody and make some money. But after all of those classes where you learn some small skills, then what do people go and do? There are all sorts of crazy activities. Go to some party, drinking, drugs, illicit sex, all these things, meat eating. So then they're getting this little craft knowledge. There's no character building. And then those people who are getting trained up without any character, and also what's the character of the teachers? Like, for instance, I had a world religions teacher, and he was saying, after class, we're going to have a world religions club, and we'll all meet at the bar downtown. So it's just one example. And in class, he would, tell stories about drugs and all these things. So there's no character building, but then these are the people that are getting trained up to get the high positions in society. So then without any proper foundation of how to act in the world, you put people in positions of power, and then there's no peace, there's no happiness. So it's explained in scripture, specifically in the Bhagavad Gita, that if one acts whimsically without following the injunctions of Shastra, of scripture, which is coming from God, then there's no happiness, there's no peace, and there's no reaching the eternal goal of life. So we see there's no such thing as scripture in schools, there's no such thing as God in schools, and so the people who are getting trained up and then leading the world, they don't bring it in a direction of happiness, they don't give anybody any peace, and no one's reaching any goal of life. Everyone's becoming animals. Because the soul, Krishna explains that whatever one is thinking of at the time of death, that's the state that they'll go to. That's the next body they'll get. So the whole world is more or less becoming animals, but this Krishna consciousness movement is showing people how they can actually think of God all the time and go back to Him, get a spiritual body instead of an animal or something lower due to unrestricted sense gratification. Sorry, I went on a tangent off of the question that you asked. But Krishna is describing what real knowledge is here. And ultimately we see all of these things are extremely helpful in somebody's life because they help them actually see life for what it is. They help them come to reality they help them understand God. And that's the purpose of human life. So if I have my phone, there's one really nice verse that I can read. Does anyone have any other questions or comments, realizations? Mm-hmm.
I always found it interesting how this verse about knowledge that you just it starts with humility. Because if we feel like we already know something, then there's not really any room for us to know something more. And then the other part that always kind of struck me about that verse was how much it focuses on like surrendering. So that just kind of struck me as something important.
Thank you. It's actually really helpful to hear, because also the last time you were here and I gave a class, actually, you mentioned that point in the class. So I think this is something I should really learn. This first part with humility, because also I remember in the Mahabharata it explains that what's the Yamaraj, he more or less killed all of the Pandavas, and Yudhishthir was the last one there. He had them answer some questions or they would die, and they didn't listen to him, so they all died. But Yudhishthir was there, and Yamaraj is asking him these questions, and one of them was, what is the, do you remember? It's like, what is the proper study? Was it? No, not that one, but it was, what is the perfection of studying scripture? I don't know if that's the right wording, but he's asking him, like, what is the goal of studying scripture, or what is perfect study of the scripture? And Yudhishthir answered him right with all the questions, and his answer was, perfect study of the scripture should bring one humility. And there was one other thing, but that was the first part. So what's the use of all of our studying of the Vedas, reading of Prabhupada's books, speaking of Krishna, if we don't actually gain any of these qualities that are actually the symbol of properly studying this knowledge? So I can talk all day about Krishna, but if I don't follow what he says and apply it, then what's the point? I just wanted to read this one verse and then I'll end it. Labdva sudurlabhamidam bahusam bhavante manushamartadam anityam apihadiraha Tornam yateta napatet anumritu yavan nishreyasaya vishaya kalu sarvatasyat. After many, many births and deaths, one achieves the rare human form of life, which, although temporary, affords one the highest opportunity to attain the highest perfection. Thus, a sober human being should quickly endeavor for the ultimate perfection of life, as long as his body, which is always subject to death, has not fallen down and died. After all, sense gratification is available even in the most abominable species of life, whereas Krishna consciousness is possible only for a human being. So the human form of life is really rare. Somehow or other, we've gotten this extremely rare opportunity to perfect our life and go back home, back to Godhead. And we can do that by understanding Krishna as he is and actually following his instructions, just like Arjuna. He surrenders to him and he says, okay, I'm ready to do what you say. So thank you all for listening. Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.